During the latter period of the Cold War, American military personnel who were stationed in the United Kingdom were involved in a series of disturbing incidents, during which they reported mysterious interactions with unidentified flying objects. Now, as we approach the 40th anniversary of the most infamous of these events, we take a look at the Rendlesham Forest Incident. But first, a very Merry Christmas to you all. We know 2020 has been a crap year for most of us, but if we can glean any positives from it, at least in terms of channel engagement and subscriber numbers, we've done really well, and we only have you guys to thank for it. You're a tremendous audience and community, and we promise to keep you all entertained with our content for as long as we can. We would also like to thank our sponsor Surfshark, who has helped us to keep up the production levels and make our content better for you guys. Remember to protect your data and privacy online with the Surfshark VPN. If you head to surfshark.deals/bedtime stories, you'll receive an amazing offer where you can get 28 months worth of premium VPN service for just over $2 a month. We can't stress just how much of a bargain this is for all the premium features and top-notch security you receive, plus the perks such as usage on unlimited devices and access to geo-restricted content. You won't regret your investment, and even if you do, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee. Head to surfshark.deals/bedtime stories to get this fantastic offer. Not only will you get one of the best VPNs available, you'll also help to keep this channel alive. At the outset of the 1980s, the Cold War had been in full swing for over 30 years, but was now entering a frightening new phase. The recent invasion of Afghanistan by Soviet forces had raised tensions between the world's superpowers, taking them to breaking point. It had also been a primary factor in the election of President Ronald Reagan, who had campaigned on a platform which promised to take more direct action against the perceived warmongering of the Soviet Union. At the time of his election victory, Reagan viewed existing US foreign policy with open contempt. The incoming president believed that the détente which the two main powers had agreed upon was the main reason that the conflict had yet to be decidedly resolved. He was determined to break the will of his opponent by aggressively escalating the funding and deployment of America's armed forces. Reagan's strategy was bold and had been conceived around the central concept that the already failing Soviet economy would not be able to survive an arms race to match his planned increases in military investment. Its inevitable collapse would hopefully result in the country's population taking to the streets, revolting against their government, and forcing political change to take place across the USSR. Such an undertaking was music to the ears of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who held equally dismissive views of the policies and agreements that her predecessors had put in place. Thatcher was quick to offer her American counterpart carte blanche to move whatever military resources he deemed necessary across the Atlantic and into mainland Britain, in readiness for a future strike across the English Channel and onto the European continent. In a move that was typical of President Reagan's wider military build-up, the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing was ordered to phase out its aging complement of F-4 Phantom fighter jets, in order to make way for the arrival of the new ground attack A-10 Thunderbolt. Poised ready to counter any perceived Soviet incursions, its three sizable squadrons had been deployed across a variety of different European air bases, including two which were hidden away in the depths of the East Anglian countryside. Dotted across the sprawling county of Suffolk were countless tiny airfields, which had once played host to the Spitfires and Hurricanes that had vanquished Hitler's Luftwaffe. And it was two of these former World War II bases that the airmen of the 78th and 79th Tactical Fighter Squadrons now called home. Whilst half of their number were stationed at RAF Bentwaters, The remainder were housed at RAF Woodbridge, 6 miles to the south. Lying between the two American air bases were the 15 square kilometres of Rendlesham Forest, a mixture of coniferous woodland and low-lying wetlands. Now, as the dark and cold December of 1980 finally drew to a close around them, the American airmen and their commanding officers carried out their duties with no small degree of apprehension. They had little idea, however, that it was not just the Soviets they would need to be on their guard against. At approximately 3 AM on the 26th of December 1980, the otherwise calm and tranquil atmosphere of the Boxing Day morning was suddenly shattered by the activation of the emergency alert system at RAF Bentwaters. As deafening sirens blared in the rooms and corridors of the sprawling airbase, armed sentries spilled from doorways, sprinting across parade squares and car parks towards their established firing positions along the base's perimeter fence. Amongst them was Airman Steve Longereau, who had been out on foot patrol in and around the base's weapons lockers at the time the cacophonous alarms had unexpectedly kicked into life. As he joined his colleagues manning the nearby fence line, his attention was immediately drawn to something moving around, out in the depths of the adjoining woodland. The inky darkness that usually separated the looming fir and pine trees of Rendlesham Forest was now unnaturally illuminated with an unearthly red glow. This strange iridescence seemed as if it was being projected by a number of vividly coloured objects, which were hurtling back and forth at great speed. The assembled airmen watched with a mixture of fear and bewilderment as the bright lights pulsated and flew around in an erratic fashion. Sometimes they would collide and ricochet off one another, resulting in a brief shower of bright red sparks and a loud metallic crash, before they shot off again in opposite directions. On a number of occasions, the objects would slowly rise up above the tree line into the night sky, hovering perfectly still, as if they were conducting some form of surveillance on the US airbase. To the staff on duty up in the control tower, the objects were also clearly visible, but bizarrely were giving off no radio signals or radar signature. The order was given that all personnel were to remain inside the perimeter fence, and to do nothing other than observe the objects. It seemed the more prudent option, as opposed to sending any of the younger and possibly frightened airmen blundering out into a dark forest in the middle of the night, risking accident or injury. Down the road at RAF Woodbridge, everything had remained still and silent, until the guards stationed at the east gate radioed to report having observed a light aircraft of some kind slowly descending into the woods a short distance away from the airfield. The duty officer, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, quickly ordered one of the base patrols to head out into the woods to confirm the validity of the sighting. The group dispatched into the forest by the colonel consisted of 3 men: Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston, along with Airman First Class John Burrows and Ed Cabansag. As the American servicemen cautiously entered the tree line, the air around them slowly began to change. The further they progressed into the forest, the warmer it seemed to get. They also became aware of a low humming noise, which sounded as if it was gradually increasing in intensity. The already nervous airmen were suddenly startled by a chorus of unnatural screams and cries, emanating from somewhere not too far away from their position. As they quickly struggled to regain their composure, the 3 men realised that what they had just heard was the livestock at nearby Capel Green Farm, which were apparently in the process of being worked up into a frenzy by someone or something. It was at this point that Penniston made the decision for the group to separate. He ordered Cabansag to peel off and follow the tree line for a short distance, heading in the direction of RAF Bentwaters, whilst he and Burrows would instead continue to penetrate further into the depths of the forest itself. They had not gone far when they suddenly came across what appeared to be a strange metallic object, hovering just off the ground in the middle of a small clearing. Penniston was a specialist in aircraft identification, and had never seen anything belonging to either the Soviet or American air forces, which even remotely resembled the floating craft he was now looking at. The object was triangular in shape, with a surface that was covered in a combination of large red lights and smaller blue ones, and it seemed to be emitting a light mustard-coloured mist onto the ground below. When the two airmen slowly advanced towards it, the floating object remained both silent and completely immobile. As he edged forwards, Penniston was struck by the lack of any recognisable features anywhere on the exterior of the craft. There was no sign of any kind of propulsion or exhaust system, nor any form of steering mechanism. He also noted the lack of any bolts or rivets, with the surface of the craft appearing to be one solid, unbroken structure. Burrows came to a halt a short distance away and watched on as his staff sergeant continued to walk right up to where the vessel was hovering. Penniston seemed to be utterly entranced by what he was seeing, drawn to a series of strange symbols that were etched into the outer hull of the object, which he would later say resembled ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Penniston reached out and was able to take hold of the craft's exterior, describing it as smooth and warm to the touch. As his fingers moved across the polished surface and then onto the engraved symbols, it felt as though they had passed from a pane of glass and onto a sheet of sandpaper. He could also discern what seemed to be a humming sensation being generated beneath his fingertips. Suddenly, the airman felt a physical jolt, as if a low electrical current was being passed through his body. The hieroglyphs had now illuminated, and he was temporarily blinded by an intense white light, which completely obscured his view. As Penniston struggled to regain focus, he could see what resembled streams of ones and zeros, dancing around at the edge of his field of vision. This sensation continued for several minutes, before abruptly coming to an end, and causing the staff sergeant no lasting pain or ill effects. The two airmen then remained in position, observing the hovering craft for a further 45 minutes, taking notes and drawing sketches of it. The strange object then unexpectedly shot off, horizontally and at breakneck speed, heading deeper into the forest and weaving quickly in and out of the tightly packed tree trunks. The two men immediately hurried back to where their colleague was standing waiting for them. Cabansag told them he had also seen a red light moving at great speed through the woods away from him, but not with the level of detail that they had described. All three airmen then made their way back to the east gate, where they reported what they had encountered to the waiting Lieutenant Colonel Holt. Charles Holt lived for rules and regulations, immediately committing that which his men had described to him down on paper, before passing it directly on to both his superiors and the local police force. Airmen were dispatched to the location that had been described by Penniston and Burrows, and reported they had found strange indentations on the ground there, along with what seemed to be burn marks. For the next 2 days, Holt became frustrated by the lack of an official response to his memorandum, and when his sentries continued to report that more lights had been sighted moving around in the nearby forest, he resolved to enter the woods with a group of airmen to conduct his own investigation. In the early hours of the 28th of December, armed with only flashlights and a Geiger counter, as they were operating outside of their jurisdiction, a small party made its way to the area described by Penniston and Burrows. Holt had decided to document his investigation using a portable tape recorder, and continued to dictate his findings as he made his way deeper into the forest. At the clearing in question, he found a series of circular indentations burned into the ground, which formed a larger, triangular pattern. In addition to this, similar marks were burned into the sides of tree trunks dotted around the periphery of the clearing, as well as freshly broken branches and foliage. When the airmen investigated the scorch marks more closely, they found that the Geiger counter's reading immediately leapt up to double that of accepted background levels. Holt continued to document these observations on his tape recorder before one of his men shouted a warning. An unidentifiable red object was approaching them at speed, descending from the eastern skies. On Holt's recording, he describes this object as being like an eye, winking down at the men beneath it. As it now moved away from them, Holt and his group then followed the object for a short distance, where it appeared to explode and then break up into 3 smaller, star-like objects. These began to fly around at impossible speed, emitting further explosions and strobe-like effects, at which stage the men elected to return to the safety of the airbase. These lights seemingly took up positions over RAF Woodbridge and started to buzz back and forth across the airfield at high speed, occasionally beaming rays of crimson light down on the weapons lockers that were dotted around the base. 3 hours later, they suddenly shot off again back out to sea, passing by RAF Bentwaters as they did so, leaving the American servicemen below wondering what the hell had just happened.